We all have to start shit. And that may sound a little crass, but it has two very important implications for anybody who, like myself, is trying to master something new. So, the first one is pretty obvious. Anytime we decide to master a new skill or to try and achieve success at something that's new to us, we have to deal with the reality that we're a bit shit at this new thing and that it's going to take some time and effort before we're good. But the second meaning of start shit is a lot more important towards actually reaching mastery. And it's the one that I see most people miss, myself included. So I'm going to try and break that down now. So, anytime you begin a new journey towards mastering something, you generally are not going to understand how shit you really are. And that's just because it's quite difficult for a complete beginner to fathom the gap in skill between themselves and a master. And so this stage is known as unconscious incompetence, as in you're unconscious of how incompetent you are in this new skill. And as you can see, it is the first stage in a four-stage journey from beginner to mastery, known as the four stages of competence. So, this is a model from psychology, and I want to use it to try and explain the second meaning of starting shit and to break down why it's so essential for actually progressing all the way through this journey, no matter what you're trying to master. Now, just like with any road, on the road towards mastery, you need a vehicle. And the vehicle that gets you towards mastery is your willpower. And this is because if you can will yourself to show up day after day, to do the necessary actions, and to genuinely iterate and improve, then you will eventually reach mastery. But just like any vehicle, your willpower needs an engine to drive it forward. And the engine that powers our will is our beliefs. So it's a no brainer, but if you believe in what you're doing, and the more you believe in what you're doing, the more you believe that you can reach mastery, the easier you'll find it to will yourself to do the necessary actions day after day, and the more progress that you're going to make. So when you look at it like this, reaching mastery seems pretty simple, right? Anybody can fundamentally do it as long as they have enough time, enough effort driven by their willpower, and enough belief. But of course, it's more complicated than that in practice. And that's because number one, time is limited for everybody. Number two, it can't just be any effort, it has to be intelligent effort. And number three, belief, like any engine, requires fuel to keep it going. Towards the early part of this journey, while you're still in the unconscious incompetent stage, because you still don't yet understand how shit you truly are, you're generally going to have an abundance of optimism. And this beginner's optimism is actually the fuel that gets you to start the journey in the first place. And it keeps you going for a little while too. But the thing about it is, beginner's optimism is quite a limited resource. And I think that's something that most of us kind of miss. Because if we understood how limited this valuable fuel was, we would understand the importance of actually economizing it early on in our journey. Because what tends to happen as you move forward on this journey is you move from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. And this means that you're starting to become conscious of how incompetent you are. And you're starting to understand how shit you truly are. And if you get to this stage and you're still relying exclusively on beginner's optimism to fuel your belief, you will inevitably run out of fuel. You may try to extend this optimism and tell yourself different motivational things. Tell yourself, I just need to believe in myself. But if you are relying on beginner's optimism, you will eventually run out of fuel here and you'll find it more and more difficult to actually will yourself to do the things necessary to move forward and continue this journey. And so, what you need is not more beginner's optimism. What you need is evidence, specifically evidence that you are making progress on this journey towards mastery. See, evidence is the natural fuel for belief. The more evidence you have for something, the more easily you will believe it. And the good news is that the road towards mastery is littered with evidence. All you have to do is find it. And so the obvious challenge is not just trying to make your optimism last for as long as possible, but to get to some real evidence before your optimism runs out. And this brings us to the second and the more important meaning behind start shit. Starting shit is about starting those activities which will bring you real, undeniable evidence that you're moving in the right direction while you're still shit. And the reason this is so crucial is because it's the only sustainable way to actually progress towards mastery. But it's something that I have failed to do countless times in the past, and I consistently see other people fail to do as well. And so there are two main problems that face us when we need to get evidence early on this journey. The first one is that because we are still shit, the early evidence that we're going to be able to get is generally going to be pretty unattractive. It's going to confirm that you are still shit because that's what evidence does, right? It confirms reality. But it will also confirm that you're getting better, which is, of course, the essential point. The second problem is that although the road to mastery is littered with evidence, there are also infinite sort of side roads and kind of like detours that we can take. And these have no evidence on them, but they're a lot more attractive because they don't confirm that we're shit. And so we'd rather go down all of these alternate routes because it's easier on the psyche. But of course, the danger there is that if you go down enough of these side routes instead of focusing on the actual road towards mastery, you will eventually end up with an empty tank. So, really, the worst thing about these sort of side routes is how insidious they are. So, they're usually things that make us feel like we're making genuine progress towards mastery without actually moving the needle forward at all. And we all have this kind of built in instinct to want to get things perfect before we start something new. It's pretty natural because some preparation is definitely needed. You shouldn't just go in entirely blind. But what happens is we get stuck in this preparation phase, tweaking things, trying to get things right, going down all of these side paths, wasting up our time and our fuel when the truth is things will never be perfect. Now, the detours and side paths are going to look different depending on your journey. If you're trying to start a new business, it could be tweaking your logo instead of just going to get your first customer. If you're trying to get in shape, it could be watching videos about dieting or workouts instead of just going to the gym. If you're like me, it could be buying equipment and tweaking your channel branding instead of just recording and posting your first YouTube video. The one thing that you can almost always guarantee, though, is that it will feel like a good excuse. Because you're a rational human being, you're not going to tell yourself something that doesn't make sense as the reason to go on a detour. So it's going to be something that's genuinely justifiable, and that's the issue. Just because it's justifiable doesn't mean that it actually matters. The only thing that matters is understanding that fuel for your belief is a limited resource and that you have to get to the next piece of evidence before it runs out or the journey's over. Now, an example that I personally love of the principle of starting shit comes from a man from ancient Greece known as Demosthenes. In ancient Athens, Demosthenes was widely considered to be the greatest public speaker in all of Greece. He was a master at his craft, best known for his speeches against Philip of Macedon, the father of Alexander the Great. The speeches were so persuasive that they rallied the whole Athenian population into its last great effort to resist Macedonian domination. There's a famous quote comparing Demosthenes with his rival Aeschines. When Aeschines spoke, they said, "How well he speaks." But when Demosthenes spoke, they said, "Let us march against Philip." But Demosthenes wasn't always this influential. He had to start shit. As a boy, he was frail and physically delicate. He had a weak voice with a stammer, and he suffered from shortness of breath, which broke up his sentences and made it hard for him to speak clearly. On top of his physical limitations, he had been dealt an unlucky hand. Although he was born into a relatively wealthy family, he lost his father at a young age, and the guardians entrusted with his care mismanaged and stole much of his inheritance, leaving him without the education and advantages he was meant to receive. His future looked bleak until one day he saw the great orator Callistratus speaking in court. Callistratus delivered his speech so eloquently and persuasively that Demosthenes decided in that moment that he wanted to master this skill too and become a great orator. He trained hard to overcome his natural weaknesses. He shut himself away in an underground room and stayed there for months at a time, practicing his speech. He shaved half his head so that he'd be too ashamed to go out and socialize. He stuffed pebbles into his mouth and forced himself to speak through them until his words came out clearer. He would run and recite at the same time and force whole passages out in a single breath. But the true key to his success was not just his rigorous training. It was the early evidence he gathered for himself while he was still shit. Demosthenes didn't wait for public speaking opportunities to present themselves. As soon as he was old enough, around the age of 18, he decided to create his own opportunity by taking his guardians to court for mishandling his inheritance. Most of the inheritance money was already gone, so even if he managed to win, he'd only be able to recoup a small portion of it. It was by no means a glamorous opportunity, but for him, it was about proving to himself that he was making progress and that he could argue persuasively in a public setting. He was still not a polished speaker by any means, but he didn't let this stop him from getting some real evidence that his goal was achievable. He started while he was still shit. Demosthenes won the case against his guardians, and in doing so, got evidence that he could in fact persuade with his speeches, fueling his belief engine further. In his speeches against his guardians, he was recognized by wealthy men who needed someone to write their speeches for them. Writing speeches for other people was once again not the glamorous opportunity he may have hoped for, but of course he took it and used it to gain more evidence for his skill at speech writing. He began delivering speeches in the public assembly, but his early attempts were met with ridicule. People literally laughed him off stage, but even this gave him evidence that he could take the worst of what the crowd had to offer and keep going. In this way, Demosthenes started while he was shit and relentlessly pushed forward, gathering evidence and keeping his belief fueled all the way until he eventually reached mastery in his craft. I think the reason that I love the Demosthenes story so much is because he did practice a lot. You know, he trained himself relentlessly and prepared himself to become the greatest public speaker in all of Greece. But he didn't let the need for preparation stop him from starting while he was still shit. He went after every opportunity to prove himself as soon as it showed up, and he used the lessons from those opportunities to iterate and improve himself. And he used the evidence from those opportunities to fuel his belief. And I think that really captures the essence of starting shit. Because I think so many of us are afraid to get things wrong or look stupid in front of other people or to do things that are demeaning or that we think are below us because we think it'll lower our status. But that's the thing about being a beginner. It essentially is about being a lower status. And learning to embrace that is actually learning to embrace the true journey towards mastery. My most visceral personal experience for starting shit comes from my business journey. So after closing my previous business down back in 2022, I had a period where I was trying out a couple of different business ideas. And my process at the time went something kind of like this. I would come up with a business idea, maybe with my business partners. Then I would come up with a name for the business. Then I would get a logo made for the business. Then I would probably get all of the branding assets, the colors, all the things to make sure it looks very nice, right? Then I would get a website built for the business. Then I might pay a developer to set up a dashboard or whatever I thought was really necessary to prepare for launch. And I would do all of these things essentially, but I would miss the main thing and I just would never get a customer for the business. So although I was very optimistic going into these business ideas, all of them kind of faded out eventually and didn't turn into anything. Now, fast forward to 2025, last year, when I started the business that I'm currently running, and my approach was completely different. So I didn't have a name, I didn't have a website, I didn't have a logo, I had nothing when I started this business. I just started talking to people. And I spoke to somebody who wanted me to help them out with an automation. I think I charged them $20 at the time. So it was a very unglamorous opportunity. I think they gave me a $5 tip on top of it. So it was a $25 opportunity, very unglamorous. But I knew in my heart of hearts that it wasn't about how much am I getting paid right now. I just needed proof that people would pay me for this service and that this was something that I could turn into a working business. So fast forward again to now, and the business is growing steadily and doing way better than anything that I did in that period where I was just trying different things and not actually starting shit. And more importantly, my belief in myself and in the business is stronger than it's ever been, which means I'm able to will myself to do things day after day to actually make progress. And I enjoy making that progress every single day. And so the most recent thing that I decided to try and master was YouTube and content creation. And I had a whole period where I was procrastinating and trying to decide what will my first video be about, how am I gonna speak confidently on camera? And I kind of just came to the conclusion, as I had before, that I was gonna have to just start shit. And that's where the idea for this video came from. So if you, like me, are trying to master something new, but you're getting held back by perfectionism or preparation, procrastination, I want to give you the permission today to just start shit.